I forgot my Spanish, but I will try. Otra vez, ya. Buenos días, mucho gusto. Muchas gracias por invitarme, señor presidente Francisco Cervantes. Es un honor estar aquí. Aprendí mi español en Cuernavaca, México. Como todavía estoy aprendiendo español, ahora voy a cambiar a inglés. I'm very sorry. Lo siento. Today I'm going to talk about Korea's policy experience to restructure its manufacturing using the fourth industrial revolution and say a few words on some food for thought for Mexico. In the course of economic development, Korea made two wise policy decisions by riding the big wave ahead of others. In the early 1960s, Korea adopted an export-oriented industrialization strategy rather than import substitution policies, which were a conventional wisdom in those days ahead of other developing countries. It led us to enjoy prosperity over the next two generations, and now, 30 years later, in early 1990s, Korea made another excellent choice. We rode IT revolution from the beginning. It led us to become global ICT leader. Almost 30 years later, we are now at another turning point. This time, we are trying to innovate our manufacturing by embracing the fourth industrial revolution. I hope this will turn out to be another sensible choice, which will bring us 30 years of prosperity. I believe Mexico is trying to catch up with Industry 4.0, which is almost similar to the fourth industrial revolution. Mexico has a very successful track record of diversifying its economy away from oil and using an FTA and NAFTA to take its economy one step higher. I believe given such a good track record of transforming its economy, the pursuit of Industry 4.0 this time will do the same to Mexico. And now, without further ado, let me tell you the Korean experience, starting with why we began to innovate our manufacturing using the fourth industrial revolution. In Korea, manufacturing accounts for almost 30% of GDP. So the manufacturing is both an engine of economic growth and job creation. Manufacturing employs almost 5 million people. 20% of total employment is productivity. Oh, I'm sorry. Its productivity is twice that of subsectors, so it gives a pretty decent wage. But recently, the Korean manufacturing is losing its competitiveness. For example, the global market share of home appliances and automobiles has been declining, and our merchandise exports have been dropping since last year. In terms of structural issues, our manufacturing is relying more and more on big conglomerates, chaebols in Korean, like Samsung, LG, and Hyundai Motors. And our small and medium enterprises are not globally competitive as Japan and Germany, and we do not have as many global hidden champions as these two countries. The share of our globally competitive medium-sized companies are just 1/6 of Germany and Japan. The productivity of our small and medium enterprises is just 1/3 of large enterprises, and their share of R&D out of total private firms is just 12%. On top of that, key manufacturing sectors such as computers, flat panel displays, and cellular phones have reached a mature stage, and for the past 10 years, 13 top export items accounted for about 80% of total exports. But this ratio has not changed too much since then. That means we are exporting more or less the same product, although many of them are much more advanced and sophisticated than before. Moreover, our export industries are suffering from global excess capacity. For example, steel has a global excess capacity of 0.8 billion tons, relative to the global demand of 1.6 billion tons. Automobile has an oversupply of 25 million cars, more than the global demand of the 100 million cars. In addition, China is rapidly catching up with Korea, except semiconductors and OLED displays. Our cell phone market share in China was number 1 until 2014. Since then, we lost most of our market share. And right now, our market share is very negligible, less than 2%. In the face of all these difficulties, the Korean government, together with its private sector, try to identify and cultivate next growth engines. But the process has been slow and tepid. That's precisely why we turn to the fourth industrial revolution as a new breakthrough to reinvent our manufacturing by embracing the fourth industrial revolution. I would like to go over what the fourth industrial revolution is, which I presume have been covered yesterday. But I will stress the key enabling technology is artificial intelligence, AI. With AI, the fourth industrial revolution will make the entire process of production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services more connected and more intelligent, which will in turn lead to dramatic increases in productivity and convenience. In so doing, the fourth industrial revolution will change the way we do the business and invent new products and services, creating new industries and destroying old ones. This sounds a little bit academic, isn't it? Yeah. That's precisely why the McKinsey came up with a simple definition of fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution is everything has sensors, and everything and everywhere is networked through ubiquitous sensors, and eventually everything will be analyzed with data from sensors by artificial intelligence. The technologies for the fourth industrial revolution is already here. But it has been used only in some industries such as cell phones, and some sectors, such as services, as in many platform businesses. And the question is how to increase productivity and create new businesses by spreading to all industries, especially manufacturing, using all those disruptive technologies currently being used only in some industries and some sectors. Then, what are the key obstacles to embracing the fourth industrial revolution and such disruptive technologies? I believe there are two. One is regulation. Many of them prevents innovators from introducing new business models, products, and services using these disruptive technologies. Under the disguise of privacy protections and consumer safety, some of them essentially protect entrenched interest groups, and some need to be adapted to the changing the digital world, which did not exist when they were first enacted. And some of them need to be further, can be refined to become a smart regulation by reflecting changing environments while they maintain the original spirit of consumer protection. The other is the legitimate fear of job displacements. What would happen to taxi and truck drivers when robot taxis and self-driving trucks are introduced in the late 2020s, predicted by many industry experts? Do we have an effective education, retraining, and social safety nets that can protect and replace them on other equivalent jobs? The answer is probably not. So, we thought the strategies to achieving the fourth industrial revolution is also twofold. Number one is to build an innovation ecosystem which unleashes the innovative power of people and businesses through drastic deregulation, focused support, and creating convergence platforms for various players to collaborate efficiently. And the other is to build a system to deal with likely job displacement issues through revamping the current education, retraining, and social safety nets. Let's take a look at each element of an innovation ecosystem one by one. The most important element of an innovation ecosystem is drastic deregulation. We are currently changing our laws into a negative list system. Under it, all activities are allowed in principle, but prohibited only in exceptional cases. In so doing, we have to strike the right balance between legitimate privacy concerns and consumer safety, and allowing new activities that can benefit consumers. At the same time, we introduced regulatory sandbags, which allow small-scale innovations without going through a full approval process. And we have been making our regulations smarter in such a way as to create new markets for renewable energies, mobile robots, and autonomous vehicles, and energy-efficient home appliances, as well as protect consumers and the environments. But deregulation remains a challenge. As you know well, platform businesses are booming. are already dominated by a few big global players. For example, search engine is dominated by Google, and e-commerce is dominated by Alibaba and Amazon, entertainment by Apple, and SNS by Facebook. Many in industry say that digital healthcare platform is the next game changer, and it's not dominated by any one big player. That's precisely why we aimed at becoming a leader in this growing digital healthcare platform. But coordination over differing interests still prevents us making a big headway on this growing digital healthcare platform. Although we have all necessary ingredients. For example, we have our top high school graduates go to medical school and biology majors, and we have the #1 smartphone penetration rate in the world and the largest smartphone maker in the world. And our medical records are electronized, almost 90%, higher than that of the US and EU. And on top of that, we have mandatory national health insurance that covers all Koreans and maintain their 40-year medical data. But due to privacy concerns, sharing even anonymous medical data, and the ban on telemedicine, which prohibits remote diagnostics and prescriptions by none other than doctors, we are not fulfilling our potential. Nonetheless, we will continue to work on relaxing medical laws and other relevant regulations. The second is focused support. We selected areas of comparative advantage and concentrated our policy support on those areas. First, we selected areas of strengths based on the views of the private sectors, our industry, and experts. And for example, in the area of artificial intelligence, we selected upstream and downstream of AI-related industries, not artificial intelligence itself, and concentrated our policy support on those areas. For the time being, it is reasonable to assume or say that we will not be able to lead the development of fundamental technologies of AI. But we have many industries and platforms that can apply or embed artificial intelligence. For example, smartphones and autonomous vehicles, IoT embedded home appliances, and smart factories and smart cities. In addition, we have a comparative advantage in semiconductors that can drive artificial intelligence. So we decided to take a two-track approach. In the short term, we will concentrate on developing these AI application areas while we steadily develop fundamental technologies of AI from the long-term perspective and horizons. In so doing, we are providing not only supply-side support, such as R&D, human resources, financing, and infrastructure, like the rapid rollout of 5G telecommunication network, or in the future, 6G telecommunication networks, but also try to create early markets through government procurements. For example, we encouraged our postal office and electric companies to use drones for deliveries and inspection of electric poles in remote mountainous areas and island areas. And also, we provided massive, generous subsidies to electric car buyers. In today's industrial policy, it is not enough to provide traditional supply-side support, R&D, human resources development, and infrastructure, but also try to provide market creating and demand-side support, such as the regulation and early demand creation. Third, convergence platforms. In order to develop new business models, products, and services, it would be more efficient to bring together relevant stakeholders to work all at the same time. And the government has an important convening role to play in this. That's precisely why we brought together relevant stakeholders for each important industry sectors to let them work together to develop new business models, products, and services. Through these convergence platforms or councils, they work together to identify viable business models, and in so doing, they try to identify barriers to introducing such business models or products or services, and study ways to tackle them and propose possible solutions to government officials or regulators participating in the platform on a real-time basis. And they can co-develop technologies and set industry standards and develop ideas to create early markets. We have 13 such convergence platforms or councils in place in the areas of electric and autonomous vehicles, IoT home electronics, and smart ships. To recap what I said in terms of autonomous vehicles, the government is changing regulations from driver-focused to equipment-focused ones to allow driverless cars on the roads, supported the development of key technologies, and established testing and proving grounds, and created convergence platforms for automakers, software developers, battery makers, even insurance companies to identify necessary regulatory changes and to develop key technologies and set industry standards. The automakers are developing new business models like infotainment and new mobility services, and also they are developing firm-specific technologies by collaborating with other industry related companies. For example, in the future, I sincerely hope the Samsung will work with Hyundai Motors to develop and produce system chips for autonomous vehicles. The second strategy is to deal with likely job displacements. Up to the previous three industrial revolutions, jobs continue to expand. But many experts say this time will be different. However, the job forecast is still not conclusive. For example, the World Economic Forum forecast over 5 million jobs will disappear by 2020. McKinsey sees over 90 million new jobs will appear by 2030 because increased productivity and increased income will create new demand, therefore new jobs. But it is not clear where new jobs will appear and nor their nature. Personally, I believe the jobs will not decrease because desires of human beings and infinite, and there are infinite ways of satisfying such desires. Therefore, more new jobs. But the bottom line is that even though the jobs will not decrease, the nature of jobs or tasks will change. For example, from less mundane and repetitive, but more creative and analytical jobs, and from permanent to temporary or independent contractors like Uber drivers. So it is inevitable. The job displacement or the task displacement will appear to a certain extent. So that's why we have been trying to equip our people with changing new skills. We have been revamping education and job training, making it a lifelong education and upskilling and reskilling scheme, focusing on cultivating creative, analytical, synthetical, as well as interpersonal and empathetical skills. And we are beginning to discuss and change labor rules. For example, how to protect gig workers, independent contractors like Uber drivers, how to define the relationship between human workers and robots. Should we restrict working hours for robots? And we are significantly strengthening our social safety net, especially unemployment, insurance, and job retraining and replacement system. And in this regard, I personally think we should seriously consider introducing wage insurances and the reviewing universal basic income. From the viewpoint, when robot taxis and self-driving trucks are introduced, it would be difficult, very difficult, if not impossible, to retrain and replace middle-aged taxi drivers and truck drivers, especially in their late 50s and 60s, to retrain and replace them other equivalent jobs. Probably very, very difficult. So we should start a serious social debate on these issues to revamp our current social safety net, especially unemployment insurance and job retraining and placement system from now on. Otherwise, resistance from these vulnerable groups would prevent governments from proceeding with necessary deregulations. As we can see in many hot debates and violent demonstrations on the issue of allowing Uber in major metropolitan areas, including our capital in Seoul. We are not still able to allow the Uber in our metropolitan area. More specifically, under the framework of Fourth Industrial Revolution, the Korean government has been proceeding manufacturing innovation on the two fronts. First, with regard to existing industries, we have been inducing our firms to focus on key few areas. So focus on a few core businesses, and we have been encouraging our firms to increase service portions of manufacturing in accordance with the subsidization trend. And finally, we have been incentivizing our firms, especially small and medium firms, to change their traditional factories into a smart factory. Second, with regard to the new industries, we asked our industries to identify next growth engines and binding constraints to enter them. And so we identified these 5 areas as our new growth engines: electric and autonomous vehicles, IoT embedded home electronics, bio-healthcare, and the next generation chips and displays. And we have been removing such binding constraints raised by our industries and providing supports along the lines I mentioned earlier, like drastic deregulation, focused support, and creating convergence platforms for various players to work together. I will say a few words on specialization, subsidization, and smart factory. We have been consulting with our businesses to restructure their business portfolio to focus on a few core business areas. As you may be aware, our conglomerate's business portfolio still tends to be thinly stretched out. But if you take a look at global leading firms, they concentrate on 1 or 2 core businesses. So by relaxing rules and taxes on M&A, and we have been asking our JEVers or our big conglomerates to shed non-core businesses and sell and merge them with others. We have enacted a law which expedites the whole process of such preemptive voluntary business reorganizations. And what would you do if you are given 2 businesses? One is what you can do well, and the other is what's promising. Which business will you choose? I think most of top CEOs will choose what you can do well. Without the capability to do well, the promising business is just a pie in the sky, the mirage. Okay. And the share of the service activities in manufacturing, such as R&D, design, logistics, and marketing, has gone up substantially recently. And manufacturing firms are increasingly paying attention to the fact that providing services relating to the full life cycle of their products, which is more profitable sometimes than selling just products. And renting a car rather than selling a car might be more profitable in the future. So renting, subscription, telecommunication as a service type business model would be mainstreamed as a key business for manufacturing firms. That's precisely why we have been consulting with and encouraging our firms to increase service activities portion of manufacturing by creating fairless chip designs, operation and maintenance services, and mobile healthcare and car sharing, etc. And finally, I pushed the Smart Factory initiative very hard while in office. I personally visited and was duly impressed with Siemens Hamburg. This is Siemens Hamburg Smart Factory and Demo Smart Factory in Singapore. By 2025, we have a plan to transform half of all our factories, which is 30,000 factories, into a smart factory by providing subsidies and by creating a demo factory. And at the same time, we are trying to cultivate system solutions as well as robotics and sensors for a smart factory as an export industry. I will not go over our promotion strategies for new identified industries. You can consult my slides later on. This is what you have been waiting for. Yeah. I would like to offer some food for thought for Mexico in proceeding to embrace the fourth industrial revolution or the Industry 4.0. I humbly offer my thinking based on my experience of dealing with the fourth industrial revolution while I was minister and successfully industrializing our economy, as well as my experience of working on Mexico while I was at Inter-American Development Bank. I'm a little bit reluctant to provide these thinkings because Korean experience is still ongoing, and frankly, the progress so far is a mixed bag. But I think it's important to learn from ongoing as well as past successful experiences, and from success, not only from successes, but also from failures, or especially what not to do and how not to do, so that you can make the same mistakes. So I try to present some of my thinkings. The first, together with the private sector, identify industries that Mexico has not only present but also latent comparative advantage and are consistent with the fourth industrial revolution. Comparative advantage is not given. It can be created. It can be discovered. For example, in early 1970s, when Korea tried to develop heavy and chemical industries, all the guys from IMF and the World Bank criticized the Korean government. Your comparative advantage is not in capital and the heavy and chemical industries. Your advantage lies in labor-intensive industries. We resisted that, and we vigorously pursued a heavy and chemical industrial drive, which led to the current Hyundai Motors and Samsung and LGs, right? So that's very important. And in doing so, it is important to create new platform businesses, like Latin American version of Uber or whatever service platforms. There are Middle East version of Karim, Middle East version of Uber, that's Karim, and the Southeast Asian version of Uber, that's Grip. And Mexico is the leader in Spanish-speaking Latin America, and you know the local knowledge very well. So now is good time for Mexico to develop new platform businesses which can be well suited to Latin America and eventually to global markets. And this ties small and medium enterprises using an initiative like a smart factory or smart workplace initiatives, and use the fourth industrial revolution as an opportunity to develop Mexican global brand industries. You need to have your own brand. Otherwise, you will be just on production base for some multinational corporations. And in so doing, leapfrog opportunity to identify the areas that you can leapfrog the technologies. For example, China, through e-commerce and mobile commerce platforms provided by Alibaba, they essentially leapfrog to the age of mobile payment by overpassing the credit cards, such as they are using now Alipay, which is the leading edge mobile payment the platform. Yeah. And in so doing, it is important to note that almost all businesses in the 21st are global games. There's no domestic business. So when targeting those identified industries, you should, it would be good to build them as a globally competitive new export industries, and incentivize the private sector to participate in those identified industries as a standalone firm with an ambition to become a global player with genuine global brand, and always aim to secure international scale, to be globally competitive. You know, all businesses, even if you try to make it domestic, you always face competition from foreign firms in the domestic markets. And it is inevitable to provide support in early stages of industrial development. That's my experience of developing industries, and that's the experiences of the US, Germany, Japan, and all other developed countries. In so doing, it is not enough to provide a supply-side support, human resources development, R&D support, infrastructure support. It would be important to provide market-creating, demand-side support through deregulation and creating early demands through government procurements or mandates or incentives. And always important to address supply-side constraints in order to maximize local absorption capacity. In so doing, human resources development and technology localization strategy, which include technology learning, technology upgrading, technology own development, should be formulated in tandem with industrial development. Industrial policy, human resources development policy, and the technology policies should be in one package and focusing on how to cultivate targeted industries. Yeah, thank you. And this is very, very important, especially when you attract a foreign direct investment. Unless you cultivate capacity to localize foreign technologies, managerial skills, then you will end up with just production bases. And the production bases can be relocated easily if there's a slight change in production cost. So you should indigenize the capacity to localize technologies from the beginning. And finally, like Korea, you seem to rely on one country for exports. In our case, more than 30% of our exports go to one country, China. I thought this is too risky. Being vulnerable to one country is too risky. That's why I had been diversifying our exports to other developing countries, such as ASEAN, Middle East, and Latin American, Caribbean countries, and the India. You know, I think Mexico can find growing Asia as an alternative market. Southeast Asian countries are growing at a rate of 5 to 6% annually, and India is growing at a rate of 7 to 8% per year. Yeah. So Mexico took advantage of NAFTA to take its economy one step higher. Why not have FTAs with Asian countries, especially and certainly Korea? I have been promoting FTAs with Mexico with my former counterpart, Minister of Economy, Guadalajara, if I remember his name correctly. Yeah. We are living in new brave world. In this world, it's not the big fish that is the small fish. It's the fast fish that is the slow fish. In the fourth industrial revolution, only the fastest, not the fittest, yeah? Not the biggest, will survive. I hope both Korea and Mexico will be the fastest, one of those fastest countries in reaching the goal of the fourth industrial revolution for Korea and Industry 4.0 for Mexico. Muchísimas gracias.
Agradecemos en este momento la ponencia de nuestro invitado, exministro de Comercio, Industria y Energía de Corea del Sur, Hyunghwan. Y por supuesto pedimos la presencia del presidente de la CONCAMIN, el señor Francisco Cervantes Díaz, quien le hará entrega de un reconocimiento por su participación en esta jornada.
Quisiera hacer una pequeña corrección quizá al final, con una disculpa al doctor. Él lo presentamos como profesor de la Universidad de Hawái, es profesor de la Universidad de Hawái, pero también tiene otras posiciones que debimos haber mencionado al principio. Es profesor invitado de la Universidad Nacional de Seúl, fue ministro de Comercio, Industria y Energía de Corea, y por eso es que él es reputado como uno de los talentos que han hecho posible la transformación de la situación coreana, que es realmente admirable, y también es miembro del comité de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial del Foro Económico Mundial. Entonces, él es nuestro distinguido invitado y le agradecemos muchísimo. Sí, hay una gran insistencia para que nos dé una copia de su presentación. ¿Sí? La vamos a subir al portal. Dice que por supuesto. Gracias. Ahora vamos para allá.